Hey guys, this is the Stabcast. I'm calling it Napoleon Screws Up because that's pretty much what happens in everything he does after he takes over. Let's see how he screws up. Okay, so as I mentioned, Napoleon's going to screw up a lot, and what you need to understand is the essential question for today is what was Napoleon thinking? Seriously, what caused his downfall? Because he makes a lot of big mistakes that are going to end up leading to him pretty much losing all of the control that he once had. So let's see how exactly that happens. All right, so he's going to make three huge mistakes, and big oopses, as it were. Speaking of mistakes, great. Anyway, the first mistake is known as the continental system. And by continental, we're referring to Europe, the continent of Europe. And pretty much what happens is Napoleon sets up a blockade because he wants to block England from trading with the rest of Europe. When he does this, his goal is to make the rest of Europe self-sufficient. He doesn't want them to be dependent on Britain. He wants them to sort of be dependent on France. But he's trying to weaken England's economy and thus make them easier to take over. However, guess what? #fail. The blockade's too loose. Cargo is going to end up getting smuggled into Europe, and even Napoleon's allies are pretty much going to ignore it. They're not going to play along with the continental system. They're just going to do whatever it is that works best for them. England, on the other hand, is going to set up their own blockade and block everyone else from trading with France. That does work. So it actually ends up weakening France and its own territories, and pretty much makes Napoleon just look like a silly pants. All right, then we have the Peninsular War. Peninsular refers to the Iberian Peninsula, where Spain and Portugal are. Napoleon is going to send troops to Portugal in order to enforce the continental system. They're not following along, so Napoleon's going to invade them. Here's the one thing about that. In order to get to Portugal, you have to go through Spain. And the people in Spain do not like the fact that Napoleon's just marching his army through there. They're really not going to like it, and they show their displeasure by rioting. And Napoleon was going to make it worse by just naming his brother King of Spain. As a result, Napoleon's going to lose 300,000 men, and he loses pretty much half of his army. His army is significantly weakened, and there's going to be a great deal of nationalism in Spain, Italy, and Germany as a result. They're going to look kind of at themselves and say, well, we're proud to be Spanish and Italian and German. So parts of his empire are going to start to turn against him. And yeah, it's the beginning of the end for Napoleon. And then he invades Russia. All right. Now, Russia's allies with France and thus allies with Napoleon's, but they need to trade with England. And because they need to trade with England and France doesn't want them to, the alliance is going to break down. Napoleon is then going to invade Russia. And what Russia does is pretty genius. If you know anything about the winter in Russia, it gets really cold. And the Russians are like, well, if we get Napoleon far enough into Russia, eventually it's going to be winter, and then his army is going to pretty much freeze to death. So Napoleon invades, and the Russians just back up. And Napoleon's like, okay, cool. And he pushes forward, and the Russians are like, and they just back up. But they don't just back up. On their way to back up, they burn down everything that Napoleon can use. It's called a scorched earth policy. This way, anything Napoleon could have used, he's not going to be able to because it's been burned. Fire. Sorry. Get yourself under control. So basically, they back themselves all the way up to Moscow, and they wait outside of Moscow. Napoleon marches into Moscow, and he's like, sweet, I win. Where is everybody? Oh. So he kind of just sticks around for 5 weeks and waits for someone to come and surrender all of Russia to him. It doesn't happen. And he looks outside and he's like, oh, I think it's going to snow. We better get out of here. And sure enough, on the way out, they run into a lot of snow. So I wish I could say it was no big deal, but it was a huge deal. The French army gets caught in this Russian winter. They don't have coats or boots or pretty much anything they would need to keep warm. And the Russians are looking at this and like, okay, cool, now we'll attack. And they wipe out 95% of the French army in the process of France retreating back to France. So, silly Napoleon, that didn't work out well either. So now all the rest of Europe is sitting around going, you know what? Now would be a good time to take over France and to beat up Napoleon. I'm not getting anything in my headphone. So anyway, they decide now would be a good time to take over France, or to invade France. So Napoleon's army is weak, and England, Russia, Prussia, and Sweden are going to join together to create what is known as the Fourth Coalition. Fourth because there's four of them, coalition because they're working together. Napoleon's going to raise a new army, but that army is inexperienced. They don't really know what they're doing, and he ends up losing at the Battle of Leipzig. They take Napoleon and they imprison him on Elba Island. Now, here is where someone other than Napoleon screws up. Napoleon is going to make a little bit of a comeback.
Don't call it a comeback. I've been here for years. I'm rocking my pants. What suffers and fear?
That's enough of that. Napoleon's going to have a little bit of a comeback because what they do is they go to Louis the 18th and they say, hey, Louis, sorry we killed your brother, Louis the 16th, and are pretty much responsible for the death of your nephew, but you want to be king? And Louis is like, I accept it. I will be king. So they bring him back to be king. The problem is the French people don't really want a king. They've already kind of played that game, and it didn't work. So they bring in Louis the 18th and say, okay, you're king now. And people really don't like him. There had been land reform during the revolution, and he's seen as wanting to undo all of that, which rightly so he did. Now, here's the what were we thinking part of this whole situation. They throw Napoleon onto this island known as Elba, and they don't just make him a prisoner. What they do is they kind of make him like king of Elba, and they give him like a little army to play around with, and it's just silly. Napoleon pretty much convinces his guards to follow him and let him go and join his little like army, and they do. And then Napoleon escapes, gets himself to France, and is literally marching through France. And as he would march through towns, people would sign up to fight with him. And within days, he's gathered up enough people. He's marching on Paris. Louis the 18th is like, I'm out. He leaves. Napoleon marches into Paris, and he is pretty much made emperor again. And then he continues to attack the British. And actually the British step in, they attack him. So France and Britain are at war, and Napoleon is going to attack the British forces at Waterloo. Basically what the battle happens is the British are kind of hanging out on the top of a mountain, but not like at the very top, like at the part like where it would start to go downhill. So you can't see them when you get to the top until you kind of like look down, and then the French get to the top of the mountain, the hill really, and the British are just like, okay, kaboom, and they blow them up. So yeah, Napoleon loses at Waterloo, and that's pretty much that. He's exiled to another island known as St. Helena. This time they don't give him a little army to be in charge of, and he's there for 21 years and dies either of poisoning or stomach cancer. No one's exactly sure. No more comebacks. All right, and now pretty much the door is open for a new order in Europe. So now that Napoleon's been defeated, he is going, or there is going to be a chance for things in Europe to be fixed, because they were a little messy, and now they're going to be cleaned up again, hopefully. All right, so that, my friends, is the end, of the Stabcast, and hopefully we will see you guys again very soon. Monkey Professor, do you have anything to say? No, I do not have anything to say. It is quite clear that Napoleon has been defeated, and that is that. Play my music.